We are grateful for Kent's return to us, not only for the gift of music, but the gift of his presence with us. This morning, as we continue in our series on the faces of Jesus, we find ourselves in Mark's Gospel, in the 10th chapter, starting verse 46. They came to Jericho. As he and his disciples and a large crowd were leaving Jericho, Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, a blind beggar, was sitting by the roadside. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout out and say, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Many sternly ordered him to be quiet. But he cried out even more loudly, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stood still and said, "Call him here." And they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take heart, get up, he is calling you." So throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. Then Jesus said to him, "What do you want me to do for you?" The blind man said to him, "My teacher, let me see again." Jesus said to him, "Go, your faith has made you well." Immediately he regained his sight and followed him on the way. Would you pray with me? Now may the words of my mouth and the meditations of each heart be found acceptable in your sight, God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. I would imagine at this point in life that each of you have been to the doctor's office at least one time, if not many times. I would also imagine that the beginning of each visit is the same. The doctor enters, and before any course of action is determined, before any procedure is scheduled, before any medicine is prescribed, you're hit with a battery of questions. What's your name? What's your date of birth? Are you allergic to any medications? How long has this been happening? How's the pain? Is it sharp? Is it throbbing? Is it dull? Are you better or worse in the morning or in the evening? Are you better or worse standing up or lying down? What's your family history? How's your diet? Mr. Snow, have you been exercising? Does having kids count? Mr. Snow, have you been exercising? The doctor asks all these questions because in situations of need, especially bodily need, assuming might be the worst thing that you can do. I might walk into the office with my arm in a sling, and if the doctor assumes that my arm is the problem, my cough might go undiagnosed. I might walk into the office nose red and pockets full of tissues and eyes watering. If the assumption is that I need allergy medicine, the unusual looking spot on my skin might go unobserved. Starting with a question fosters dialogue. Questions build relationship. Questions go beyond the surface and the assumptive. Questions allow a person in need to set the tone and the agenda. Questions set the stage for listening. I spent a full year as a volunteer chaplain with Hospice of Huntington back in West Virginia. The first month or two, I would make my rounds each Tuesday morning. I would enter the residents' room, hold their hand, and offer a prayer. I started noticing that my prayers were surface and assumptive. They didn't feel right. They felt rigid. They felt forced. So I changed my practice. Before praying, I would ask the residents, "How can I pray for you? What would you have me lift up?" And then I listened. And come to find out, contrary to my assumptions, they hardly ever wanted prayers for themselves. One woman invited prayers for her spouse. They were worn out, tired. A father invited prayers for his son. He was starting a new job. A woman invited prayers for her church. She missed her people. My assumption, my incorrect assumption, is that these people would want prayers for themselves. 99% of the time, I was wrong. My assumptive prayers were missing the mark. My inquisitive prayers were building relationships. So far in this series, we've explored Jesus as rebel, Jesus as teacher, Jesus as mystic, and this morning, Jesus as healer. The gospel writers frequently depict Jesus as healing throughout the course of his ministry. Jesus heals Simon's mother-in-law's fever, heals a person with leprosy, heals a person with paralysis, heals a man with a withered hand, a woman's hemorrhage is healed, a man's deafness, a deceased daughter. And sometimes Jesus heals by touch, and sometimes Jesus heals with a word, and sometimes it takes Jesus a time or two to get it right. Jesus' healing ministry becomes so popular that wherever he goes, villages, cities, marketplaces, farms, the people flock to be in his presence, that they might only touch the fringe of his cloak. And we understand why. When your body doesn't work the way you want it to work, or when it doesn't perform the way you expect it to perform, or when your body puts your work at risk, or your enjoyment of life in limitation, or even your living or dying in question, you'll do anything to seek assurance, to find comfort, to receive restoration. Many of the people who encounter Jesus in these healing stories have a permanent circumstance, especially within the medical and scientific context of the first century. Paralysis, permanent. A withered hand, permanent. Deafness or blindness, permanent. The hemorrhaging woman's condition had so far lasted 12 long years. When Jesus heals at the pool of Bethsaida, the man had been ill for 38 years. There's some question among scholars as to whether or not these circumstances would have excluded these people from their worshiping community or not. But there is no question that it would have marginalized them socially, pushed them to the edges. Here again, the response of the crowd this morning as Bartimaeus cries out for Jesus. When he heard that it was Jesus, Bartimaeus began to shout out and say, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Many sternly ordered him to be quiet. The many, the crowd, they already find themselves close to Jesus. Bartimaeus is living on the margins of society. The circumstance of Bartimaeus' body exclude him. The many, the crowd, are in a position of power. They can either permit Bartimaeus an audience or silence his cry. Bartimaeus' status as a beggar excludes him even further. He's doubly marginalized. He cries out from the outside and is shushed by the insiders. The many, the crowd, the insiders, they are presented with a choice even before Jesus responds. They can advocate for Bartimaeus or they can exclude him. They can amplify Bartimaeus' voice and relay his cry to Jesus or shout him down and silence him. They can guide his hand to Jesus or push his hand to the side. We've heard their choice. Many sternly ordered him to be quiet. This is a constant and persistent theme throughout the Gospels. The insiders, those closest to Jesus, do not understand who he is, what he is about, or their role in relationship to the unfolding way of Jesus. It is the outsiders, those forced to the margins, those silenced and excluded. The outsiders are the ones who get it right. Who Jesus is, what he's about, and their role in relationship to the unfolding way of Jesus. Jesus doesn't assume to know Bartimaeus' needs or circumstance. If we assume he wants physical healing, we might be corrected when he cries out to Jesus not for healing but for mercy. And Jesus asks a question. What do you want me to do for you? Jesus, the insider, the one with power, the one in control of the situation, places the ball in Bartimaeus' court. Martin Copenhaver writes, most of us have the tendency to assume that we know what another person wants or needs, particularly if that person is dealing with some kind of challenge or disability. So when Jesus asks, what do you want me to do for you? He's showing respect for the man. He's not presuming to know what he wants. He's asking, and he's listening. It's a way of recognizing that the blind man is not defined by his disability. Jesus' question is a way of relating to the man as a human being. It's also a way of inviting him into a healing relationship. What do you want me to do for you? If this question sounds familiar, Jesus asks James and John the exact same thing a few verses before. If we went back to verse 35. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came forward to Jesus and said to him, Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you. And he said to them, What is it you want me to do for you? And they said to him, Grant to us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory. James and John, insiders, disciples, original followers of Jesus, don't get it. Jesus asks, What do you want? And they respond, Glory, honor, privilege, notoriety, a preservation of power, a perpetuation of power. Jesus asked Bartimaeus the same question. Then Jesus said to him, What do you want me to do for you? The blind man said to him, My teacher, let me see again. Jesus said to him, Go, your faith has made you well. Immediately he regained his sight and followed him on the way. Now hear this clearly. Bartimaeus' blindness does not make him less than. It does not make him incomplete. It does not make him broken in need of fixing. It does make him an outsider among insiders. And his recognizing Jesus and following Jesus on the way stands in sharp contrast to those insiders who misunderstand and will soon abandon. Who do we sternly order to be quiet? Who do we on the inside still draw the line of distinction between us and them because of physical circumstance? And I ask as an insider. Who do we knowingly or unknowingly, intentionally or unintentionally exclude because of their physical circumstance? The AIDS patient, still struggling under stigma and misinformation? Is it the transgender person seeking hormones or reassignment surgery, weighed down by societal stereotypes and misunderstanding? Is it the veteran with PTSD, unsure how to function once again within the expectations of society? Is it the child with autism? Is it the senior with Alzheimer's? Is it the person living with chronic pain? Is it the woman who wants autonomy over her body? Is it the terminally ill that want to choose the finality of life on their own terms? Is it the individual who struggles with depression? Where I'm from in West Virginia, it was opioid addiction. We scrutinized those individuals and demonized them, and in too many instances just wished that they would die. Who do we still sternly order to be quiet? The pitfall, or the very real caution in these moments, both biblical and modern, is to hear these persons as conditions to be treated or deficiencies needing completion or shortcomings to be made whole. They're not. They're children of God, made in the image of God, made in the likeness of their Creator. The question of Jesus and the responses from those insiders, James and John, and outsider Bartimaeus, invites us insiders to take a step back and listen before we speak, question before we assume, and take seriously the voice of the outsider. Outsider voices are the ones most attuned to deepest need. Outsider voices are the ones with the unique perspective. Outsider voices are the ones most frequently ignored or brushed aside or disregarded by insiders like me. And on the flip side, the question of Jesus and the responses from James and John and the outsider Bartimaeus invites the outsiders in this room and in our world to raise your voice above the silencing crowd. Insiders like me can frequently be insulated. We can frequently be tunnel visioned on our own needs and agendas. Insiders like me too frequently assume to know the needs of the world instead of asking questions of and listening to the needs of those on the outside. It is the outsider voice again and again that recognizes Jesus. And it's the insider voice again and again that misses the mark. So I've been trying to imagine what this shift from outsider to insider could have been like for Bartimaeus. To shift from being shouted down to being heard. To shift from being defined by his body to defined by his humanity. To shift from living under the decisions of others to steering his own course. To shift from being unnamed to named. Almost all the other healing stories in Scripture engage unnamed individuals. Bartimaeus is one of the few to carry a name. Trying to imagine the shift from forced isolation to discipleship. To shift from desperation to assurance. To shift from doubt to affirmation. I have to imagine or to wonder what this shift is like for Bartimaeus because I most readily identify with the crowd. I never had to shout past the crowd to advocate for myself. Or instead of imagining, I could engage the Bartimaeus of this world. Learn their names. Listen to their stories. Enter into relationship. Just like Jesus. Just like the one whom we follow. Just like the one we seek to imitate. I close with a poem by the Persian poet Hafez titled, "How Do I Listen?" How do I listen to others? As if everyone were my master, speaking to me their cherished last words. Thanks be to God.